So my name is Barbara Piperata. I'm a biological anthropologist, and my research tends to focus on nutritional anthropology and medical anthropology. So I'm very interested in sort of how nutrition shapes health, especially among women and children. We went down to Nicaragua. Nicaragua is the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, so high rates of poverty. About 30% of the population is living at or below the poverty line. So we went down to understand the impacts of food insecurity, which is, inadequate access to sufficient nutritious food to meet one's needs. We went down there to look at food insecurity and its impacts on moms and children. And one of the most important findings of that study was the impact of food insecurity on moms' mental health. So considering the role women have cross-culturally as being food procurers and food preparers and then responsible for taking care of their children, especially in terms of nutrition, it's not surprising that we found that as food insecurity increased, moms' perceptions of their food insecurity increased, their mental health decreased. They had greater rates of depression and anxiety. And so that wasn't really surprising, although that's not been a major research area. We've been more interested, especially in developing countries, of studying the relationship between food insecurity and nutritional outcomes, and here we're looking at mental health. But I still wasn't surprised, considering women's role in the household, that their mental health would be tied to food insecurity. But what was less expected was the stigma that was attached to food insecurity in this context. And what's important about that is that while women reported having robust social support networks, we asked them about that and a variety of people that they could rely on for assistance with a great number of things, money, helping with children, even getting food. Because of the stigma attached to food insecurity, they felt very anxious about tapping into those support networks or revealing their food insecurity situation, of being ridiculed, of being thought of. It was embarrassing for them. And so it led them to either not tap into that potential resource, or when they did, it caused them a lot of anxiety. And so that's really important for policy, because that then tells us for me, it's two different things. One is that since we've been focusing in developing countries on solving food insecurity because of its impacts on children's health and growth, that if we tackle that, we are also going to improve mom's mental health. So that's an important finding. But also, we need to be careful of what strategies are employed, because women may not utilize a good policy that might be put in place, or a policy that might be put in place that is not culturally relevant to them, or is inappropriate because they're fearful of using it or anxious to use it because of the stigma attached with it. They don't want to be associated with revealing their food insecurity. So we've shared those results with the Ministry of Health in Nicaragua, and work with Nicaraguan scholars who work with the Ministry of Health so that this kind of information can be shared as the country responds to the food insecurity situation. So I think if I go back and I think about my training as an anthropologist, and then the training I provide to new generations of students as a professional anthropologist, I think some of the most important things for me have been just the critical thinking that I've gotten as being trained in anthropology, to recognize that a lot of the complex issues that we face, both as a society and as a species, big, large-scale issues, are very complex. And we're often presented with very simple black and white kind of solutions. So for me, it's really enriched my ability to sort of better debate topics, to see the gray area, to appreciate the fact that people have very different opinions on the same topic, and to be able to try to integrate that kind of information, to understand where those different opinions come from. I don't think I would have had that had I been relying on my former training just in biological science. So I think it's given me a more appreciation for the complexity of issues, and then also the skills to think about that and to come up with solutions to that. So that's important, because you use that every day in all the decisions that you make. We've got a nice, robust collaborative team that's studying the formation of the infant gut microbiome in Nicaragua. So this is a second project in Nicaragua. And basically what we want to understand is how culture shapes the gut microbiome. So we know now that humans have a lot of microbiomes. You have a microbiome in your mouth, on your skin. But the largest of our microbiomes is in our gut. And they estimate that there's somewhere between 10 and 100 trillion cells in there. And that community has a huge impact on our health, and it's formed really early in life. It can be altered, but fundamental aspects of it are formed at really a young age, like between birth and 2 years. So we wanted to understand the factors that influence that. A lot of the research on early gut microbiome development has been done in highly developed contexts like the United States, Europe. There's much less known about how it's formed under other kinds of environmental contexts. So what we're doing with this project is studying how children's interaction with their environment is shaping their gut. So for me, as an anthropologist, this is like a fascinating subject, because literally, if we know that the external environment is shaping our gut microbiome, we have to appreciate the fact that culture is shaping the way we are interacting with that environment. So then we have culture literally shaping our gut microbiome. And we've never thought about it like that. So that's a unique way an anthropologist is going to see this. So what we're doing in that project is working in rural and urban households to understand how children interact with that environment early on. And so cultural beliefs and practices are going to shape that. What do you allow your child to eat? What animals do you allow your child to come in contact with? Do they have contact with potentially contaminated water or soil that have pathogens in them that would then feed back on that gut microbiome and shape it? So we are, this past summer, we had students from anthropology, public health, and veterinary medicine go down and collect preliminary data to kick this project off. And it was an exciting time for them. They worked together as an interdisciplinary team. They all had their tasks, but they were all helping one another. And we are now analyzing those data. We just finally got the microbiome results back, so we're analyzing the data, and we'll start publishing on that this summer. And we've got several grants out that we're waiting on to see if we can take this project to the next level and study it on a larger scale. Medical anthropologists have played a very critical role for many years now in elucidating variation in human health and understanding the context of that. So if you take the United States and you think about inequality in terms of disease risk, medical anthropologists have played a very central role in demonstrating how, say, exposure to discrimination, chronic exposure to discrimination, racism, maps literally onto the body. It gets under the skin as chronic stress, and then how that translates into poor chronic health outcomes, specifically cardiovascular disease. That's a classic one. So that work has just been groundbreaking. I mean, that's cutting edge research, and it's informed public health policy. I mean, we now have social determinants of health as an overarching framework in the United States. Everyone's very aware of that. Medical anthropologists contributed to building that kind of perspective. So that's really important here at home. But when we think about humans globally, we're dealing with a lot of new and emerging, say, infectious disease. So you could take Zika as an example. Zika is a vector-borne disease. It's spread by mosquitoes. Most of the people who contract Zika, although there are some cases in the United States, live in very impoverished regions, okay? So one of the things that medical anthropologists have demonstrated is it's the context in which they're living that places them at risk. It's not that there's something about these people as individuals that makes them more at risk. It's the context. So in a lot of these situations, you have poor water infrastructure, and that causes people to actually store water, which then is a perfect breeding site for mosquitoes, which then puts them at greater risk of getting any mosquito-borne disease, such as Zika. So by working on the ground in communities with people, understanding their practices, understanding why they store water, that helps inform policy. That helps us say, a simple solution of saying don't store water around your house is not going to be followed, because how can people not have water? They need to have that. So it draws attention to the overarching structural problems, and it helps us come up with more lasting solutions people can actually follow. Another important thing that medical anthropologists have contributed when it comes to Zika is that it's very common to see on websites, if you bring Zika up, even on these big global websites, that women in high-risk areas should avoid getting pregnant. Medical anthropologists have, really been at the forefront of arguing, listen, that's not very realistic. In many of these places, women don't have ready access to contraception or full control over sexual behavior and decision-making. So telling them to not get pregnant is just it's an impractical advice, because they don't really have control over the conditions in which to do that. So again, by working on the ground, understanding cultural practices and behavior, as well as the context, the social, the economic and political context people are in, medical anthropologists can help inform policy to make sure that policies are responsive to the realities on the ground. And that's an important role that we play, because we really do our work on the ground in communities with people.